Welcome to Souls and Hearts Be with the Word. I am Dr. Gerry Creed, a licensed marriage and family therapist in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm excited to be with you today and especially excited to be with my co-host.
I'm Dr. Peter Malinowski, clinical psychologist here in Indianapolis, Indiana, the crossroads of America. It is so good to be here with you, Dr. Gerry, and with our audience. It is a blessing and a privilege.
Yes, I can't tell you how nice it is to be with you, and I feel like I've had a stressful week, but I know you have too. And yeah, we can land here and really delve into these readings. And believe it or not, I think these readings have a lot to say for
Oh
both.
boy. Oh boy. Yeah, we are. They're so rich this week, ladies and gentlemen. They are so rich this week. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And this is episode 41 from the 22nd Sunday of Ordinary Time.
Yes, yes. And Dr. Peter, you're leading the main core discussion, and the title that we came up with was really intriguing. I think it's intriguing. See in 3D by renewing your mind. So I can't wait to get into that, and I know you've got a really cool action item that comes out of that too. So
Yep, yep. It is so that's I want to start right here with these readings all seem so interwoven to me. But I'm curious for you, Dr. Gerry, when you
wait. Just sorry, my fault. Want to remind everyone, if you haven't listened to the
Oh
reading,
yeah.
go over to Hear the Word, which is on YouTube and Apple and Spotify, and listen, or
Yeah,
go read it on your own. It's fine too,
yeah.
of course. But you're going to want to read these preferably. But we'll go over some of them, so you'll probably catch on. But
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's on YouTube, it's on Apple, Google Play, all of that. Hear the word and listen to these readings for the 22nd Sunday of Ordinary Time. It's gonna really enrich your experience of this podcast. So
you're about to ask me something that sounded really
no,
interesting.
yes. So these readings, I know you read through them.
Yeah,
What leapt out at you? What like grabbed you in some sense?
yeah. Jeremiah.
Jeremiah.
All of it, because there's so much there, and I know there's the big rebuke of Peter
Right.
by our Lord, but honestly, I feel like I'm reading this for the first time. I know I've read this before, but when he said, "You duped me, O Lord, and I let myself be duped," oh my gosh, that actually, I mean, that sounds strange, but that spoke to me. There have been times when I can honestly say I've been really, I guess, angry at God, or there's a part of me that was super
Right.
angry at God,
Right.
and I just, I've been frustrated, and even honestly, this is going to sound funny, but I mean, I love my children, and they have all grown up, and I can remember at times the fact that they're all moved out, right? So I know you still have little ones, but
Right.
my wife and I are empty nesters,
Right.
and and I can remember when the last one left, and it was this feeling of, God, you are so cruel. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
like, you made me love these creatures with my whole heart, and I wasn't a perfect father or anything, but I love them, and now they're gone,
Now
and
they're
now
gone.
it's like I'm supposed to just kind of go on, and of course they're not really gone. I still interact with
Right.
them and
Right.
all this, but it was just this feeling of, God, your love is cruel. Like, your love is painful.
Painful. Yeah.
Um, no, it isn't truly cruel. I know that he isn't
Right.
really cruel, but it's just the
It
sentiment.
feels that way, right? That's that whole God image thing. That's what Jeremiah is saying. It feels that way. I mean, what I love about Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, is that he just gives you a window into his experience. There's no covering over anything. There's no dressing anything up, for public consumption. There's no curating his image on social media. He just gives it to you, and
And here, I mean, my sense is that he's being attacked, obviously, by people, right? Like, they're turning against him because of his faith,
right.
right? I'm sure is all of our experience too at different times, where we feel like, hey, I gave my life to you, Lord, or I've dedicated this. That maybe it's a job, or maybe it's some mission or something, and to have egg thrown at you
Right. Right.
is difficult.
Yeah, it's not even that Jeremiah is, is not succeeding in the converting, the people. It's that he's being rebuked, mocked. He just got out of the stocks, right? They had him in the stocks,
Mm,
and it's really interesting when you go to that first line, and it's translated in the NAB, the New American Bible, as, you duped me. I think it's, yeah, you duped me, O Lord, and I let myself be duped. But if you go back to the Latin, look at the Latin, and it says, seduxiste me, Domine, et seductus sum. It really means you seduced me, Lord, and I
mm,
was seduced. Right? There's this enticing, this sort of leading on. It's not just that you tricked me or you duped me, but it's that you led me on, you drew me in, you enticed me, you seduced me, and I
mhm.
let myself be seduced. And
Wow.
so it's almost like, and then the next line he says, you were too strong for me and you triumphed. Right? There's almost like this element of you just dominated me. Right? You took advantage of that seduction and dominated me. There's this hint of it. It's very earthy if you actually get back into the original languages. So yeah, it's not just that you tricked me, but it's like you led me on, you drew me in. And how many times do people, for example, when a vocation to the priesthood or religious life doesn't work out, I mean, whoa, you can feel just like this.
But I've even, because I work with clergy, religious, and so on, and I've heard really good priests, like who are really committed, struggle with this very thing at
Yes,
times. So it's a normal human response, and in the face of God, that is, I mean, worth at least allowing out. Like that was my thought was, wow, Jeremiah he even
right.
said those things.
He
Like
said them.
some part of me is like, are we allowed to say that? Is lightning going to strike, or am I a bad Christian if I say
Right.
to God? But he's crying out. And help me understand, Dr. Peter, do you read this the same way I do in Jeremiah, in that third chapter? It says, I say to myself, I will not mention him. I will speak his name no more. So to me, he's speaking to God, right? He's saying, I'm done with you, God. But then but then it becomes like fire burning
Fire.
in my heart,
Right.
imprisoned in my bones,
Right.
and I
Right.
grow weary holding it in. So he can't help it.
He can't help it. So
Even he,
here's the distinction, right? It's 2 dimensions versus 3 dimensions, right? This is what
mm,
we were kind of getting at in the title. Like, if you just look at this from a human perspective, like God is like mistreating me. He's taking advantage of me. He's tricking me. Um, but Jeremiah and God have this relationship that Jeremiah feels in his bones, right? It's like a fire within him, right? God is deep in his soul. And so Jeremiah knows that he can't just let this go. He's trying, right? He's saying to himself, right? I don't think he even says it's to God. He says, I say to myself, I will not mention him. I will speak in his name no more. I'm no longer going to be his mouthpiece. I'm not going to be his prophet anymore, right?
mhm.
But what this shows is that Jeremiah has a deep faith that in spite of all of his trials, his tribulations, all of the challenges and obstacles that he faces in his ministry, God is continuing to draw him on. And why does God do that? Because God knows that Jeremiah can handle that level of demand, right? So there's this relationship anyway. Like, God is deep under his skin. And it illustrates the tension that we face, right? Because our vision is compromised, right? We see us through a glass darkly, says St. Paul, right? And that's what Jeremiah is struggling with.
I mean, I think of things very sometimes on a very human level, like a day to day level. Like put it this way: I could be doing all this work that I believe is for God or ultimately for His kingdom and good work or whatever, and then something happens, like I get a flat tire, or a credit card was rejected because it expired, and then they cut off your power. Then uh, right, and then I could immediately, on a human level, go to, why is God letting this
It's
happen to
happened to
me?
me. Yeah.
And I'm going to throw everything away. Why do I do anything at all? And it becomes this whole turmoil, and all this anxiety kind of shows up. And I guess what you're saying is, there's looking at it from with different vision, there might actually be something that comes out of that that is important.
Yeah, that's the huge challenge for us too, because if you look at St. Paul, we go to the second reading of Romans chapter 12. He says, "Do not conform yourselves to this age," right? And he's talking about the worldliness, right, in Rome in the first century, right? Do not conform yourself to the age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Why? Why should we be transformed by the renewal of our mind? Well, St. Paul tells us that you may discern what is the will of God. So St. Paul is telling us that we've got to transform our minds in order to discern the will of God. It's not going to come just as a function of our own human effort, our own natural reasoning. I think one of the reasons why Christ came at the moment in history that he came in, because he could have come at any moment in history and in any place, but he came into the world when the Greeks philosophers had done about as much as you could do with human reason alone in terms of philosophy. And he came at a time when the Romans had gone about as far as you could go with law, in a civil sense, right? You've reached the capacity, you've reached the limits of human ability unaided by divine revelation. And so now St. Paul is telling us we've got to renew our minds in order to discern the will of God. And there's a number of psychological factors that get in the way of that. There's a number of things that happen psychologically that make that difficult for us.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's interesting. I've never heard it explained quite that way. Like that was the reason why Jesus came at that time was the culmination of the Greek and Roman. So that's interesting. So tell me about those psychological factors. What is it?
So I think a lot about vision, right? And one of my favorite prayers is very short. It's straight from the scripture, but it's the prayer of Bartimaeus. And he goes, Domine ut vidiam, which in translation means, Lord, that I may see, right? Blind Bartimaeus, Jesus is passing by. He calls out, Lord, that I may see. And this is the thing that I think very much distinguishes clients of mine that get better quickly from clients who don't is, do they see in that third dimension? Do they see from a providential perspective? Can they make the effort to look at their situation through that lens rather than defaulting to mere human vision, right? Rather than defaulting to the wisdom of our age, right? Which is ready to feed us with all kinds of false information and interpretations about where God is. That's the number one thing.
That's fascinating. And you know what? I wonder if that ties will help me anyway tie up these two readings and take us to the gospel because here's the thing. I felt like there's a process, right? Like when I read Jeremiah saying what he says, "You duped me, Lord," and he's crying, he's literally
Hmm.
crying
Hmm.
out to God, and that we need to do that. That there's an emotional piece that sometimes, you know what I mean? Like my tire goes out or whatever, and I just need to say, God, why? And I
Right,
need to go through something,
right,
right? Only to come out the other side, basically Jeremiah says, "But you're in my bones, and I
right,
have to turn to you." And then
right,
we even see in this beautiful responsorial psalm where he basically is basically saying, "My soul clings fast to you. Your right hand upholds me. You are my help. In the shadow of your wings, I will shout for joy." So there's a surrender that happens there with God, and so we go through a you know, angry at God, whatever, into a surrender. And then we see that leads to this renewal. But that's not what happens to Peter, I think.
Not, yeah, now that's right. He tries to prevent the harm from happening. It's so interesting in the gospel because just 5 verses before Jesus rebukes him, right, and says, "Get behind me, Satan." Just 5 verses before that, Peter proclaims that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, Christ, the Son of the living God, right?
Mhm.
And Jesus' response, and this is just a few verses before, is that, "Blessed are you, Simon, because you the Father basically has shown you this. This is not just your own vision, right? So Peter's vision is like spot on, and he's got the courage to profess that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's the Christ, that he's the Son of God. And that was the fruit of Peter discerning, right? That was Peter looking at this in three dimensions, through the eyes of faith, through the eyes of God's providential love, right?
Mm.
But then the contrast comes right back in verse 23 when 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 Peter says, because Jesus is talking about how he's going to have to die on the cross, how
Right.
he's going to be how he's going to be
And
suffer
Peter
greatly from
doesn't
the
want it.
elders. He's going to be killed, right?
Right. Peter doesn't want him to suffer.
Doesn't want any of that.
Thing
But
to say,
Peter,
I want that to happen to you, Lord.
no, and from a natural perspective, that could look like, you know,
Yeah.
human affection, right? I mean, it's just we wouldn't want any kind of harm like that to happen. But Jesus knows that if it doesn't happen, then the redemption doesn't happen, right? The redemption of mankind doesn't happen. And so
Mhm.
he comes down really strong, and because Peter says, God forbid, Lord, no such thing should ever happen to you. And he goes to Peter, and this is like the harshest language, right? Get behind me, Satan, right? To refer to Peter as Satan is really strong. And he says, you are not thinking as God does, but as human beings do. You're
Mhm.
not thinking as God does, but as human beings do. So the way I'm thinking about that is not thinking as God does, three dimensions, right? Except as human beings, but as human beings do, two dimensions, right? You've lost the spiritual dimension. You've lost that spiritual depth. It's understandable, right? But yeah, it's hard. It's a hard saying from Jesus, right? That must have just whacked Peter like right upside the head like a 2x4, right?
Yeah. Feels a little brutal, but especially just after this huge blessing. But it does make sense. And when you're saying that, it's occurring to me. I just had a conversation with somebody over coffee this morning, and it was one of those things where they asked me a little bit about my background and even talking about trauma. And I can remember saying, and they were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that," when I was sharing a little bit of my trauma history. And then I said, "But you know what? I think God used it for good."
Yeah, yeah,
Well, yeah, you could say that from a human perspective. Like, I was so far removed from a feel bad for myself place in that conversation that it was like, "Oh yeah, I guess that's true. That is, thank you for saying that." But God used it for good.
right.
And that's, I think, seeing with that 3D vision, right?
With seeing with that 3D vision, right? And so the difference here is a couple of differences. One is that Peter is in front of the other apostles. Jesus has to make a strong statement so that this doesn't have a pernicious effect on the other apostles. Um, and so there's that strength in the nature of the response. But I also think he's really driving home that point that I'm bringing you a revealed religion. You need to listen to me. Like I'm God. Don't contradict what I'm saying. You've just pronounced that I'm the Son of God just 5 verses earlier.
Yeah.
So you've got to listen to me. You cannot rely on
Right.
your own reason, on your own perspective. You have got to become smaller, childlike. You've got to entrust yourself to me, confidence in me. And that's really hard for us to do if our security is to navigate by our own light, to
Right.
navigate by our own wits. If that's what you learned how to do, like if that's what you learned, like kept you safe, was navigating by your own wits, being smarter, quicker, more perceptive, whatever, it
Which is what,
actually makes it harder. What?
yeah, which is what we all do.
Which is what we do. Oh, I'm notorious for that. I am a man of strong opinions. I have learned to rely on
Yeah.
my own perceptions and my own vision. We've seen some of that in Souls and Hearts, just sort of
Well,
navigating, and we lead that.
I've
So
had to be Mr. Independent. Like, I
yeah,
learned to be independent and to get things done on my own. I think you have too.
yeah.
And he says, "Take up your cross and follow me, and whoever wishes to save his life will lose it." That's a hard saying to me.
Well, they know what he means. They're talking about crucifixion, which is the punishment that the Romans reserved for the worst cases. I mean, this is like worst case scenario is to wind up dying on a cross, and it's not just the physical agony of it; it's the ignominy of it. It's the shame associated. That was designed to shame you, and the worst possible way to be nailed naked on a cross, you
Yeah.
know?
Wow. So we have to, in a way, yeah, we all experience shame. We all experience, we want to avoid pain. We want to avoid suffering. We want to do things on our own, and we want to avoid shame.
Yeah,
And this message is saying that's a very human perspective. And somehow we have to transcend that. And I feel like between Jeremiah and Saint and the response and St. Paul, they're
right,
just kind of showing you the path.
right,
Yeah, you can say what you need to say and process as a human, but then you have to turn your heart and cling to God and
right.
surrender.
Well, and it helps to work through our aversion to being shamed, right? Like, because that is a real limiting factor. So if you happen to have a trauma history, or if you just happen to have the sort of normal, experience the normal trials and tribulations of, of life, and shame is something that we naturally want to avoid. Our Lord is saying, I mean, to Jeremiah, for example, Jeremiah experienced shame in spades. He's coming out of the stockade. He's been laughed at, the butt of jokes, ridiculed, mistreated. If we're going to live out the Christian message and we don't address on a human level
Mhm,
the hold that shame has on us, that it creates to help to have us avoid things. It's not just so that we feel better. I don't recommend that we work through these issues at a natural level just because we want to have an experience in therapy like it's some sort of psychological day spa, where you put the little cucumbers on your eyes and your therapist tells you that you're wonderful and you just feel better. It's not like that. It's about getting ready. It's about really being free from these human impediments like needing to avoid being shamed in order to be able to carry out the gospel, to bring the gospel to people, to tolerate, to
mhm.
tolerate the criticisms and the shaming of others.
I feel like we have a misconception that life we're supposed to do stuff to make our life perfectly comfortable, and I don't know that our lives will ever be perfectly comfortable. Instead, we have to find meaning in the things that are sometimes really really difficult because there is a greater purpose, or there is not always. I mean, some things are just going to be difficult. I don't know, but in fact, getting comfortable with the fact that this is going to be a bumpy ride.
It's going to be a lumpy ride. Well, we're guaranteed that. I mean, it's told us right in today's gospel, right? Um, that whoever wants to come after me has to deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Right? To take up our cross, right? To voluntarily pick it up, not just be unwillingly nailed to it, but to actually pick it up, to embrace it, to hold it close. There's a lot of work that has to be done on a natural level to be able to do that. I have had a number of clients come in over the years who have wanted to die to self, who have wanted to pick up their crosses, who wanted big crosses, but there was a lot of work to do to be able, on a natural level, to be able to do that because grace perfects nature, right? We need to have grace in order to carry our crosses. That grace has to perfect our nature. And so there are going to be, on a human level, any number of psychological impediments or psychological hindrances, stumbling blocks, right? Because that's an interesting thing. The stumbling block, in this translation, it says, Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me." Right? You are an obstacle to me. That's like lame translation, I think. Just not that I'm well versed in translating all these things, but some translations call it a hindrance. If you go back to the Greek is skandalon, which really means like a stumbling stone. It means a stumbling block or a stumbling stone. And it's so interesting because that comes just a few verses after, Peter being the rock
Yeah,
upon which Christ is going to build his church, right? So he's gone from being the rock, the foundation, to a stumbling stone, right?
right,
Because
yeah,
of this lack of vision, because he's gone from three-dimensional vision to two-dimensional vision. That's how important this is. And these translations miss that because they're busy trying to transliterate rather than actually into trying to give us what they think the meaning is, rather
right.
than give us the actual like color here. And that's why it's good to read a lot of different translations and to actually take a look at some of the underlying more literal meanings of these words, because
Yeah.
yeah, there's a play on words here.
I like
I
that.
mean,
That's powerful. But you know what what you just said hit me is just how often we go from thinking we're the bomb being like, on the floor, literally that's Peter here, right? Like
Right.
one minute he is, like you said, the rock, right, built upon which the church is built, and the next he's a stumbling block in the way.
Well, think about what might have happened to Peter. Let's do a little thought experiment. Like you've just been praised to high heaven by the Son of God. All right. You've just been promoted to the highest position on earth, the vicar of Christ. Okay. It's possible that there might have been some ego inflation, right? There's possible that there might have been some pride coming
Right.
in. It's possible that Peter is now like feeling it, and like, he's going to start asserting some of this authority with Christ himself. Right. So, in the rough and tumble world, in the rough and tumble era that they were in, to bring Peter down to size, really quickly may have been that was really important to Jesus. I mean, if
Yeah.
that whole was playing out that way, uh, that quick rebuke, right, within basically the same exchange, um, may have
It's
been
a
what was
real
going on there.
lesson in humility, really,
Right.
for him, but for all of us. If Peter can be humbled, then we all need to on some level, and really think, but see, that's what's hard is that what he said to Jesus feels like it was a nice thing on a human
Was a
level.
nice thing. That's the
Yeah.
thing. That word "nice" has bothered me for a long time. It's derived from a 12th century French word that means stupid. If you actually go back to its origin, to call somebody nice in French in the 12th to 14th century was an insult.
Oh,
It was an
okay.
insult, and over time, that word has changed in its meaning, right?
Mhm.
So because why? To be nice is to grant another person what's gratifying or what they want, right? And that's different than being good. Being good is granting them what they need, and
Hmm.
that's a whole different ballgame. That might be gratifying or it might be frustrating, and we know because Jesus is without sin, understands everything perfectly, that Peter needed this kind of rebuke. And the other thing is that he could take it. Peter was made out of the kind of stuff that could take a rebuke like this. I think
Hmm.
sometimes we get a little edgy because we'll be like, I don't know that I could handle that, and it may be that you can't, and Jesus isn't going to treat you that way, right? He's
Right.
actually customizing the way that he works with everyone, including Peter, including the woman at the well, including, the woman caught in the act of adultery, including, the Pharisees, in the way that is uh, optimally designed or tailored to help them the most.
Yeah. Can I mention something? It's a little jumping around,
Yeah,
but I feel like I just sort of wanted to throw it in there, and it's back to Romans,
yeah.
and he says, "Offer you," and I think it relates, of course, but offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. And I know we jumped ahead to the renewal of the mind,
Hmm, hmm.
but I did think it was worth mentioning that that's a powerful thing because, especially for both of us, both doing EMDR and trauma
Right.
work, like the fact that we're to offer our bodies, because, like you said, the Greeks would have been more seeing the body as like material matter as negative and the spirit being such a higher thing. And here, this isn't the case. Like the spirit, body and the spirit are united, right?
They're
In
united.
Christian perspective, and he's literally saying your bodies are to be offered as well, not
Right.
just your soul, and holy and pleasing to God, your spiritual worship. So I guess when I think of my anxiety, like for example, the example I was giving earlier about car tire blows or something like
Right.
that, and it throws me off, and I feel like angry at God and anxious. Like there's a sense in which like I might feel anxiety in my chest, or I might be tense, or those kind of reactions. And really, I feel like St. Paul here is saying, offer your body,
Body. Yeah.
not just giving your mind up intellectually or something to God. It's your whole person.
Whole person. Body, mind, heart, and soul. Right? I keep going back to those four things. It's all of them because God wants to love us all. We are embodied beings. And so if we leave our body out of the equation, that's going to be a huge part of us that's missing, right? If we leave our heart out of it and it's just a dry intellectual exercise, it's just a conceptual abstraction thing, that's not going to be complete either, right? We can't just be our emotions either. It's got to be
Yeah.
all of us.
Right on, right on. You just said something that reminded me of another thing I wanted to point out. Souls and Hearts is Jeremiah, but then it becomes, and I think we mentioned it before, but I want to really highlight it. But then it becomes like fire burning in my
Burning.
heart.
Right.
That's how embedded
Right.
God is in Jeremiah's, even when he's having a bad day, as it looks like he is. If he just got out of the being tortured or whatever, that's fine. It's really bad. But but it's still like a fire burning in my heart, imprisoned in my bones is unbelievable imagery.
Right.
And I just think, what does it mean? Is that not seeing things differently? Is that really seeing how God is active in my life, even when things are horrible and rough and I'm experiencing anxiety?
There's going to be times where we have to hold on to that third dimension by the grace of faith, right? Because in this moment, Jeremiah is not seeing it. He's not able to like wrap his mind around God's designs for him in this moment, but he's holding on to it at a deeper level. He's holding on to it at the level of faith. And so, he makes an affirmation in God's goodness. He continues his ministry, right? And that's all a huge credit to him to be able to move forward with this even when we can't see it. Because our human vision, I'm just be really frank with you, is unreliable. How many times have each of you out in the audience looked at somebody whose human vision has failed? They're seeing something an entirely distorted light. That happens all the time. That happens all the time. And so it's when our vision is supplemented by grace, by the grace of faith, that we see things more as God sees them, right? Yeah.
So, Dr. Peter, what's your action item to help
So
make that?
we're gonna do an action item here, and I need you to have. Right, so this is not something that you're gonna do. This is not something you're gonna do like as we speak, right? But I want you to get like a pad of paper, a tablet, like a tablet in the old days, right? When I was young, right, which had pieces of paper on it, not some electronic gizmo thing.
Did you
But
have an abacus too?
I actually do. I actually do have an abacus. Um, but yeah, tablet or three pieces of paper, okay, and I'm going to invite you, like you were talking about, you gave the example of a tire blowing out. It could be another example, something that really troubles you, some problem that you're having, right? And on the first sheet of paper, the one on the top, I'm going to ask you to just write down like what comes to mind spontaneously about it, right? Just where are you with that right now? How are you making sense of it? Where's God in it? Blah blah blah. Just kind of blah, kind of just sort of vomit it all out there onto that first piece of paper, right? Then you set that piece of paper to the side. Then the second piece of paper, you start to look at this situation, but invoking and seeking that third dimension. You're now going to start to look at this through the eyes of faith. All right. You're going to ask for faith to come into you, going to ask to be enlightened, right? You're going to pray the prayer of blind Bartimaeus, Lord, that I may see, right? And now, as you enter into that phase, you write down the perceptions again, right? Write down the perceptions about that event, about that situation, about that trial that you're experiencing, whatever it is. Could be a thing that just happened, or it could be a long-standing thing. Whatever is troubling you, and you're writing it from that perspective. Now,
Mhm.
all right, so we want to see if there's some shifting between that first and second page. But the third page is where the magic really happens. All right, and this is where you let God write it down, right? This is where you really only write down not the product of your thoughts, right? Because we don't know how influenced that's going to be by the two-dimensional thinking, right? The two-dimensional vision. But now you're just really like creating a space for God to tell you whatever he wants to tell you. And when I do this sort of thing, I usually switch pen colors. I have a purple pen that I use when I'm like really wanting to write down what I think God is saying, and then I have an aqua colored pen when I write down what I think Our Lady is saying. And there could be some things that are wrong about this. There's no guarantee that this is going to be perfectly It's going to be a perfect translation. But the point of the exercise is to enter into how God sees it. So the prayer here is asking God, how does he see the situation? And
Mm.
then really listening. And it may take some time to get this third page filled out. It may take some time. You can talk to Our Lady if you want to talk to your guardian angel or some saint, Saint Joseph, Saint Teresa of Lisieux, your patron saint. But and I have different colors that I do this in, But I mean, to really listen. The important thing is to get into the habit of seeking this third dimension, seeking this depth of vision, right? And noticing also what's getting in your way, what memories are coming up, what grievances, what axes do you have to grind, what kinds of experiences are coming up, what kinds of emotions are getting up. You can keep track of those too, because those might be really helpful for you to again bring to God. I'm having trouble hearing you, God, because I'm just so angry, or I'm having trouble hearing you, I'm having trouble engaging with this because I'm feeling hopeless, or whatever is getting in the way, so that you can begin to recognize that as an obstacle in the natural realm. So
Wow.
three pieces of paper. The first is just where you are right now, as you struggle with this thing. The second is when you begin kind of just trying to pray and then seeing what comes to you in your thought processes, seeing how your thought processes improve. And then we take it a one more level, which is where it's really listening in this receptive mode to what God is saying, to what our Lord is saying, to what Mary is saying, to what St. Teresa of Lisieux or St. Joseph is saying to you about this particular situation.
That's beautiful. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and then let us know if you want to. You can certainly let us know through the website. You could also email me at crisis@soulsandhearts.com. Just really engage with this. It's amazing if you create the space, if you invite God in this way. It's amazing the kinds of things that can happen. It sounds really simple. Most of the exercises we offer here on Be with the Word are not complicated. Um, they're really simple, but they create that space for God to really work, to really speak to us.
Yeah. Nice. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, we do look forward to hearing any, how this works and what you're finding in your life. And I would say, if you want to get more interactive with Dr. Peter, especially in this case, is to join the Resilient Catholic community.
Yeah, we do this kind of stuff all the time in the Resilient Catholics Carpe Diem community. That's built up around the Coronavirus Crisis Carpe Diem podcast that I do weekly. We've just gone through a whole series on 14 different problematic God images. These are the things that we know God to be in our bones, but that are all distorted, come from our experiences. So there's been about 8 episodes over the last 8 weeks. We've gone through a huge series on God image where we're also gotten into our images of Mary, how those develop, and how we need to get into relationship with them to correct those God images. It's kind of where we're going to be going in the future with that. There's a whole community of folks that are growing up that are helping each other through this kind of thing called the Resilient Catholics Carpe Diem community. You can check that out at soulsandhearts.com. Up in the all courses and shows tab, you can click on that. It's free for the first 30 days, $25 a month after that. There's all kinds of extra benefits that come with it, so you can check that out. And then I was also on a podcast called The Color of Light with Adam
Mhm.
Cross, who's a therapist in Southern California, and we were getting into scrupulosity. We were really talking about scrupulosity and what
Yeah.
the roots of that are. And we're not just looking at it from the symptom level perspective, but going all the way back to God images and how those impact scrupulosity. So he was good enough to invite me on, and he didn't regret it, which was glad to hear. And we had a great conversation, and so that came out just last Thursday, and that's also on our guest appearances page on our website, and it's also on Spotify. It's on YouTube. The Color of Light's on YouTube. That's a YouTube show.
I
So
look forward to hearing that.
yeah,
We've got
so
so many good things coming your way. Join us. Please, if you haven't signed up on soulsandhearts.com, subscribe so that you get to
Definitely,
find
yeah,
out
get
all the
those
different
email
stuff.
updates. And yeah, and there's also a course called Be Called, discovering living out your vocation, where a lot of these obstacles to seeing that third dimension, because I'll
Mhm.
tell you, this stuff really gets in the way of vocational discernment. And Dr. Glafke and you, dear Dr. Gerry, do an excellent job in that one as well. So
Thank
check
you.
that out. Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
All right. Well, listen, I think we got to wrap up, right?
yep, I think we're done for today.
Yeah, it's been fun getting into these readings with you. We hope you got a lot out of them. We love hearing from you. And I know there have been a few people, I've gotten a few messages from people saying they listen to us on the way to church, or they have now, and people are going back to church by and large a lot and getting a lot out of it, and then having a post church discussion. So we're thrilled to hear that some people are doing that. So, all right. So, Nate, we'll be looking forward to seeing you again next week. Until then, be still.
Believe,
Be
be
loved.
loved.
Take good care.
God bless you all.